We negate. Contention 1 is lower income countries. Subpoint A is brain drain. Because of the increased demand for healthcare, international healthcare workers will be attracted to the U.S. As Mackey writes that U.S. healthcare reform will undoubtedly attract international health worker immigration due to increased demand for services. For example, the UK single-payer system caused brain drain to increase exponentially. As Ohanian writes that UK physician brain drain has become so extreme that 35% of existing British doctors are imported from very poor countries. Problematically, brain drain specifically targets lower income countries by harming their ability to fight disease. As Mackey writes that the impact of brain drain can be illustrated by the HIV/AIDS epidemic and has disastrous effects on many resource-poor countries. This leads to health workforce shortages and further increased demand, decreasing potential to prevent further spread and address inadequate treatment of patients and disease outbreaks. In turn, this creates more difficult working conditions, feeding into a negative loop that creates greater incentives to migrate while public health continues to deteriorate. Historically, brain drain increased adult death from AIDS. It would get even worse if the U.S. was partaking in brain drain, as Barbda, which is a doubling of medical brain drain rate, is associated with a 20% increase in adult deaths from AIDS. Subpoint B is providing drugs. The U.S. currently gives cheaper drugs to lower-income countries. As Mello in 18, it's because we pay so much, pharmaceutical companies are more willing or able to grant price concessions elsewhere to lower-income countries. Medicare-For-All reduces drug prices for the U.S. As Toy in 19, writes that drug manufacturers would have to pare down prices considerably under a single-payer system. The government would have substantial negotiating power and could claw back patents if companies refuse to pay the government its desired rate. This would reduce prices by at least 30%. With these lowered prices, drug revenues would decrease. As Sue writes that U.S. revenues would fall by as much as 20.3%. Decreased revenues lower the probability that new pharmaceuticals reach lower-income countries. As Landgraf at the Center for Global Development writes that price controls lower the probability that new pharmaceuticals reach consumers in lower-income countries by 30%. This is crucial to alleviate health concerns. As Taylor writes that since 2000, pharmaceutical companies have provided health interventions worth $4.4 billion and up to help 540 million people. Specifically, it has saved millions from AIDS and other contagious illnesses. As McNeil in 19 writes that 20 years ago, thousands of Africans died of AIDS each day as they could not afford the prices. Nearly 20 million Africans are now on HIV treatment for less than $100 a year. Top quality drugs for malaria, tuberculosis, hepatitis C, and some cancers are now sold at rock bottom prices in poorer countries. Contention 2 is immigrants. Millions of undocumented immigrants are living in the U.S. As Funk in 19, there are 10.5 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States. Immigration status finds that 60% of these undocumented immigrants have health benefits right now through private insurance. This goes away when you affirm. With Medicare-For-All, there will be a centralized computer system. As Lebowski in 17 writes that in a single payer, each American with the same insurance and the same access. For a single payer, documented a single database that would facilitate the sharing of electronic medical records. Problematically, ICE would use information from centralized government systems to track immigrants. As Irwin in 18, writes that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, or the DHS, uses databases and information sharing systems to target people for deportation. Because of this fear of deportation, undocumented immigrants will continuously not get health care. As Hoffman in 17, writes that undocumented immigrants underuse health care. Fears can keep them away. Even though they are eligible, they don't want to put the rest of their family in jeopardy with deportation or raids in the future. The federal government can deny legal residency status, commonly known as a green card, to anyone considered likely to become a public charge, meaning a drain on public resources. The inability to get healthcare means they cannot get treatments, leading to chronic illness. As Kimball in 19 writes that fear instilled in the proposed rule means people avoid care for manageable health problems until they've reached an advanced state that can no longer be ignored. Often, this delayed treatment can cause chronic illness and even disability.
Great, I'm good. Everybody ready? Great. If everyone's ready, time will start now. Newton South affirms resolved that the United States should pass the Medicare-For-All Act of 2019. The American healthcare system is broken. Arno 28 UMass writes that while the rest of the developed world provides healthcare to its citizens, the United States depends on corporations that profit off of American suffering. This free market approach has failed as health insurance premiums have increased twice as fast as workers' wages. Arno concludes, despite having enough resources to provide for everyone, 1/2 of Americans cannot afford medical care. Medicare for All is the path forward. Contention 1 is saving lives. Katz 20 of the New York Times writes that Medicare for All would provide free healthcare to all citizens, a human right covering more than private insurance does. Rappelite 20 of the BHR writes that this comprehensive coverage will save 68,000 lives every single year because individuals will be able to receive the care they need. Moreover, the CPD explains racial bias is entrenched in the current healthcare system, with African Americans 19% more likely to be uninsured than whites. This is particularly important in the time of COVID. There's a reason the use was hit the hardest. Con 17 writes that when people are not scared to go to the hospital, the US will be able to detect diseases before they become pandemics and prevent large spreads by reducing our uninsured population. Helping Americans does more than just save lives. Harvard in 2019 explains that by giving adequate healthcare, we would create $1 trillion a year in spending by preventing hospital visits from destroying workers' productivity. Contention 2 is restoring the American dream. America's healthcare crisis is a symptom of a wider disease, an economy that has left behind its most vulnerable. Since the deregulation of the economy and the plundering of the welfare state, American communities across the country have been pushed into cycles of underdevelopment. As large healthcare corporations take advantage of working people, Featherstone 20 Jacobin writes, 40 million Americans live in poverty and 9 million have no income. And unlike past generations, Americans have few chances to improve their situations. Featherstone quantifies 62% of Americans cannot afford a $500 expense. Every hospital visit, ambulance call, or health emergency is the end of a family's economic prospects. Medicare-For-All offers hope for two reasons. First is increasing disposable income. Brunig of Jacobin writes in 2019 that by eliminating healthcare costs, Medicare-For-All would increase the incomes of the poor by 29% and would be the most potent anti-poverty program in history. Size 19 of The Guardian explains Medicare-For-All would lead to a tax cut for a majority of Americans because the tax burden would fall on the rich. Thus, Medicare-For-All would lead to the biggest take-home pay raise in a generation. Second is promoting businesses. The AP News writes in 2019 that small business growth has decreased by 16% in the last 15 years. Skyrocketing healthcare costs doubling. Baker 15 of the AARP writes that workers do not start businesses because they're dependent on their jobs for health insurance, but if healthcare was paid, small business creation would increase by 20%. Thankfully, by decoupling employment from healthcare, economist Josh Bivens of the EPA argues in 2020 that workers would have more freedom to start their own businesses under Medicare-For-All. Slavinsky 12 of the RCM writes that a 1% increase in small businesses decreases poverty by 2% because of employment opportunities. For these two reasons, Featherstone quantifies Medicare-For-All would reduce poverty in America by 90%, promoting the development of our least fortunate areas. Growth has impacts wider than just the US. When our economy grows, we trade and invest in other economies. Aurora Owe to the IMF finds that a 1 percentage point increase in growth in the US leads to an 0.8 percentage point rise in growth elsewhere across the world. Economic growth is vital. It leads to education, sanitation, and good governance. And the Rockefeller Foundation finds that a 7% increase in economic growth in Africa will allow more than 400 million Africans to rise out of poverty. Thus, we are proud to affirm. Ready for cross?
Could I see one card before we start cross?
Of course.
In your first link on your second contention about increased disposable income, you say lower income people will have tax cuts because it'll be paid for by the rich.
Yes.
That card.
Sure. Instead of doing email chain, we have all of our credit cards on Google Documents. So just we can send them in the chat, so it's in the chat for everyone to see.
What's the author name?
Size.
Oh, I see that now. Sorry.
Okay, Peyton's going to look at it during cross. We can start.
Great, let's do it. You can have the first question.
Okay. So if Biden gets elected in November and implements a public option plan, does that solve all access contentions?
No.
Why?
Because, well, one, you have to win that Biden gets elected. But
yeah, so if we win that.
Yeah. Two, I think it definitely doesn't solve our C2, because what our C2 is talking about is people paying for healthcare in the first place is an unreasonable cost, and that makes it so that people still lose thousands of dollars. But then on the first one, I would say, insofar as what we say at the top is that private companies' existence creates bad cost incentives that makes millions of people have bad quality care or not be able to access care. That's probably going to be still existing when we keep
so first, on your second contention about how people pay too much, if you in a public option plan you can opt into a government-run healthcare system, which means they don't have to pay. How does that not solve costs they have to pay and access?
All right, so if you want to nuke the round, you can. If you want to say Biden gets elected, then your first contention, we have an increase in the access to healthcare per your argument.
Because
more doctors
public option doesn't include price control, so it doesn't nuke our contention.
All right, so do you want to then say that if you run this by an argument and rebuttal, you will concede your first subpoint about doctor train, and then you can concede immigrants,
No.
so that all the poor people will be on a central list.
No, and it also doesn't
And also
concede
Biden-
immigrants
and also
because
Biden
immigrants
has
is about how private insurance doesn't go away. You can get a question
So
though.
Biden has price controls too. So honestly, if you want to run it, it nukes the entire round. It doesn't
Okay.
do anything for anyone.
Okay, we'll debate this later. You can get a question.
Sure. So how is healthcare data stored right now?
How's it stored?
Yeah.
If you're under private insurance, it's stored in with the private insurer, and if you're in public, it's stored with the public or the government.
It's stored both there, and it's stored in regional databases from hospitals. So does the government have access to all of these databases?
No, the government does not have access to private insurers' information. Private insurance companies only care to make profit. That's why if they have an undocumented immigrant, which we tell you 60% of those undocumented immigrants have private insurance, they want to make profit. They're not going to release those or give those to the government when they want to keep those people in their plans.
The U.S. government has access to all health resources in the United States, which is why all of your evidence is not talking about Medicare-For-All. It's talking about how in the status quo, people who are immigrants are afraid to get care because they think their health data will get tracked to them.
Our evidence,
ICE knows through this data and through all other kinds of data, like their transportation data, where these immigrants live.
So let's talk about our evidence. Our evidence says that right now, people under public insurance do not get care. People who cannot afford private, undocumented immigrants who cannot afford private insurance do not get care because of the So our argument is a perception argument, right? It's the idea that because now people see how healthcare is government run, they fear actually getting care because of a perception. So even if you guys win that they can still deport people now, that's not our argument. Our argument is about how now this system is government run, which means the perception that people will get deported is higher. That's also time.
Yeah, you just conceded that they already don't get care.
No, it's about public insurance versus private.
We're going to run a little bit of prep starting now. Okay, so that was 30 seconds. Is everyone ready? Let's start at their first contention about saving lives. A lot of problems here. First term, because Medicare-For-All will create doctor shortages in 3 ways. The first is with lower pay. As Pipes in 2020 finds that Medicare-For-All encourages Americans to consume more care because it's now cheaper, causing doctors to work longer for less money and ultimately quit, which is why UK with a single payer made a third of what US doctors make, and as a result, the US saw a shortage of 120,000 physicians. In the UK, 9 million Britain appointments were cancelled in 1 year, which worsened overall illness. Second is lower reimbursement rates. As Stark explains in 2020, that Medicare-For-All would shrink the physician workforce by over 44,000 doctors because the government sets lower reimbursement rates that would decrease reimbursement rates by 30%, which would drive them out of the practice, which is why UK and Canada, 20% of those who visited the emergency room never were seen. The third is by decreasing the workforce, as Medscar19 finds that Medicare-For-All would eliminate the jobs of 1.8 million people with private insurance companies, which is why Mastoni impacts that this will cause 12 million people to be misdiagnosed with the wrong illness and 80,000 people to die from complications. The second term, because Morrison in 20 finds that Medicare-For-All would decimate the U.S. economy, the GDP would decrease as much as 24% because of unaffordable costs. Payroll taxes would triple, leaving 71% of households worse off. Third term, because Shepard in 16 finds that Medicare-For-All contributes to drug shortages because companies are not making the same amount of profit. Molaskis in 13 writes that this decreases overall access and welfare by delaying product launches, diminishing availability, decreasing incentive, and increasing long-term shortages. Fourth term, because Feinstein in 20 explains that hospitals would shut down because Medicare-For-All decreases hospital funding by 40%, or $800 billion due to lower reimbursement rates and charging private insurers higher, which Luthi 19 impacts that 55% of rural hospitals will close, causing those in rural areas to lack access altogether. But fifth term, because Medicare-For-All will be financed through a deficit, which CRFB finds that the debt would rise as 203%, which problematically Boister in 13 finds that this forces cuts to social spending programs, which help 45 million people from falling into poverty. Now onto the second contention about American Dream. First, there's no link because the CRFB finds that it would be impossible to fund Medicare for All with solely taxes on the rich. 100% tax on the rich only covers 40% of the cost of Medicare for All. But now onto their first subpoint about disposable income. First, Everts and Stone find that workers lose money because it finds that every $1 decrease in health benefits only leads to an 80-cent increase in salary. That means that workers lose 20 cents for every dollar in the affirmative world. Secondly, Blanso in 19 finds that you can turn it because deadweight loss from taxes will cause overall losses for Americans, as they end up paying $32 trillion in taxes over time, which will leave Americans poorer. Now onto the second link about small businesses. You can turn it because to pay for Medicare for All, Thorpe finds that small businesses would face a 6.2% payroll tax increase, decreasing their ability to pay their workers on average. There are two implications. The first is that a decrease in revenue will lead to decreased workers' wages because their capacity to pay decreases. The second is that increases the probability that small businesses will close because they already have constrained budgets due to the coronavirus. They're already put at the brink, and this will just be the next part to make small businesses collapse. But then on their impact level, about how U.S. economic growth is going to trickle to lower income countries. Arias in 15 finds that U.S. economic growth does not lift lower countries due to barriers. This is seen empirically, that most developing countries have been trapped at a constant low or middle income level because of the richer countries just getting richer. Specifically, the probability of transitioning from a low to middle income country is only 5%, from middle to high is almost 20%. There's clear disparities. But this is due to bad political institutions. The elite class just builds becomes more economically favorable and doesn't actually help the people at the bottom of the social ladder, which is why they can never actually impact to the developing world. The only way to do that is the neg ballot.
We're going to take a smidge of prep.
Okay, so the order of the speech, there are a lot of turns. So the order of the speech is going to be down our case. Okay. On our first contention, they first talk about a doctor shortage. They first talk about low pay, but comparison case when you decrease administrative costs and under Medicare for All, doctors need to work less. There's an actual decrease in salary. Then they say there's less reimbursement, but this isn't in the bill. This is in Medicaid, not Medicare for All. This is not true. Then they say there's 1.8 million private healthcare people who lose their jobs. That isn't true. This is a 4-year transition plan, which means that, and they also offer from contractors to have any decrease in the employment of Medicare for All, which didn't happen in any other socialized medicine system. They say that Medicare for All increases taxes that considered our size. Evidence indicates it's going to be a progressive tax, only very, very rich. So for 90% of America, they're better off. The comparative is conceded. Then they say that there's going to be drug shortages, but A, the FDA solves because it can do things like step in and intervene so there's never been a drug shortage in the United States, and B, when this argument is talking about generics, or pest control never happen on generics because they're already so cheap. They talk about hospitals closing, but global budgeting and on Medicare for All means that every hospital can get exactly what they need. There's never any decrease in hospital closures. They talk about a deficit, but we say that pay goals and Congress, that Medicare spending increases like Medicare for All must be funded by taxes, but also the bills, there's never going to be any increase in deficit spending. They say, then on our second contention, they say from the CFRB that taxes won't be in the rich, but 60% of America, this argument is from conservative, this argument is funded by the rich, from conservative institution. We say that 60% of the wealth is literally controlled by the 1%, so obviously they can fund it through wealth taxes. And they say that workers lose $1 whenever workers lose $1 of healthcare benefits, they get 80 cents of salary. That means for every, that means that they're not getting a lot of salary, not that they're losing salary when to a from that solution. Then they say that, they cross-play the argument on taxes. Again, we've dealt with that above. On small businesses, group of other responses, they already spend more than 60% of the money in healthcare, so these are non-responsive. On the impact level, they say that there are other barriers to corruption, but the World Bank indicates that 1 billion people have been left out of poverty because of trade, so obviously trade has done something good for people who go to their case. On brain drain for responses, there's O'Connell 20 indicates U.S. barriers to getting work, prevent U.S. barriers to getting work visas to prevent doctors from coming to the United States, and even when we try to relax restrictions, it still makes a tough administrative landscape to navigate. But second, Malta 20 indicates that every developed country is a doctor shortage, including ones like with socialized medicine, but it's much easier for doctors to go to places like New Zealand, Australia, Germany, and the UK because they have better residency schools. But third, in Medicare for All, there are provisions to increase our domestic doctor training, which is to offset demand, meaning we won't have any we won't have to get them from abroad, which is important because we already have 132,000 doctor shortages that functionally turns the argument. But of course, the incentive for doctors to come to the United States in both worlds, they still always want more money, which is always coming here. On lower drug prices, two responses. First, drug companies use tiered pricing to maximize profits for 5 reasons. A, the IAT rates developing nation's medical industry is meant to expanding access to penetration for pharmaceutical companies and long-term profitability. But second, B, plot data indicates that low-income countries can afford high prices of the U.S., so tiered pricing appreciates the profitability equilibrium. And C, the United States gives tax breaks to profitable for companies who tier price. And D, pharmaceutical companies do it to get good public relations, which is something that's very helpful to them. In both worlds, they'll always continue to tier price. And E, it is so cheap to manufacture drugs. The health program, the EU writes that drugs are sold at just 1% of their American market price. They're still vastly profitable in the developing world. There's always a profit incentive. But for this evidence, this response to our mellow evidence, is Sunstone of the EU indicates that even with price controls, the EU still engages in tiered pricing. But second, their impact evidence is pharmaceutical propaganda. Child's 11 writes that tiered pricing undercuts competition and crowds local investments to the pharmaceutical companies. Neville 19 finds that right now drugs cost 30 times as much as they do in the America and the developing world. Luckily, Affirmative solves A gets lost and indicates Medicare-For-All would allow Americans to revoke patents for drugs to monopolizing American farm in the developing world. That B, Johnson indicates that when pharmaceutical companies fear price regulation, they offshore their manufacturing to the developing world to empirically increase access twofold in places like Argentina. Go to the argument of immigrants. There are 5 responses. The first is that centralization of just 2 databases causes billions of dollars because government wants to cut costs under Medicare for all, they won't ever find out. Second, Collier 14 writes that if all hospitals use the same system, the scale of the problem is even larger. And when an outage occurs, the scale of the problem is even larger. When an outage occurs, making large-scale crashes inevitable, meaning ICE will ever get to use the databases. But third, the New York Times writes that ICE is already using data sharing contracts and 2 databases allow them to define undocumented immigrants. But fifth, there's so many other issues behind this. So many other issues. This argument, like there's not enough political capital for ICE to do this. There's sanctuary cities that prevent this, and ICE is very well organized. Focuses on borders is probably not a true argument. But lastly, they concede and cross that immigrants already don't get healthcare because of fear of deportation. So the argument's pretty non-unique. At the end of the day, if we wouldn't grow, this links to their arguments. There's 1% increase in growth, increases health infrastructure in the developing world, meaning we do the best things for that, and also we prevent immigrants from going to the United States in the first place because they have better outcomes at home. Thank you. Please engage. Oh, sorry. I hate when I always say engage when I want to minute for.
Okay, we're gonna run a few seconds of wrap.
Okay.
Okay, I'm ready now. So, is everyone good? So, on my response about lives, you say that, administration costs go down, right? How do administration costs go down?
So you centralize the system, so now it's just one system, and that one system.
No, I'm saying, how do they get rid of those costs? Because you still have to do administration costs, but how do they get rid of them?
They reduce them by streamlining the system, making it more efficient.
And in doing so, don't they reduce the workforce as well? Because you get rid of the workers who are in private insurance companies doing their own administration work.
No, you just reduce egregious administrative barriers or evidence from.
No, I'm asking what those barriers are.
Yeah, so those barriers are things like long wait times and stuff like that. What our evidence is from Arno is that right now private insurance jacks up the price of care, which makes it very expensive for the American consumer by doing stupid things like creating long administrative things that don't need to happen. We say that we affirm it. Yeah.
I'm asking about what happens to the people who are doing those administration duties.
Okay, so some of them do get laid off, but we say it's under a 4-year transition plan, which means there's never any tangible impact. It's going to always find other jobs. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Sure. Let's talk about immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
So what % of immigrants right now have access to healthcare?
Okay, so 60% have access to private insurance. That's our uniqueness. That's what changes. 60% have private insurance, however, under the plan Medicare-For-All, that goes away.
Have any undocumented immigrants ever been detained from ICE while getting private insurance?
No. That's our argument. That is the Irwin evidence, which is that ICE uses public records, and we have the evidence that says that private insurers aren't in that public database. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So onto your American dream.
Yeah.
And you say that you're going to tax the rich.
Mm-hmm.
How much does this actually cover of the plan?
Well, all of it. So
how is that possible?
So the top 1% of America controls 60% of American income. So if we tax their wealth instead of their income, which is what Bernie Sanders wants to do, that means we can physically run the entire
the problem with that is you don't respond to my analysis, which says that even if you tax every single rich person in the U.S. 100% of their income, it would only cover 40% of the projected cost.
No, we absolutely do. This is talking about an income tax. We're not talking about an income tax. Bernie Sanders is progressive wealth tax. Because again,
I'm talking about progressive wealth tax.
It's not about, your argument is about a wealth tax. Then obviously it mathematically makes no sense considering that the top 1% of Americans, again, control 60% of their wealth. So it's much easier for our government to tax them because they have a majority of their wealth than to tax them.
I'm telling you that if you tax them, all of their wealth, it doesn't matter. That's what you're not responding to.
Wait, I'm confused. No, the top 1% have trillions of dollars in wealth.
And this plan is trillions of dollars. That's what I don't fundamentally understand.
No, I absolutely do understand. But what I'm saying is they have more wealth than the rest of America combined. So there's no reason why we're going to tax the middle class because the rich can't fund it all. Because the rich absolutely can't fund it all. I mean, yeah, I guess.
And we're going to start running prep.
Actually, before we run prep, can we just get the World Bank 1 billion card?
Sure. Just give us a second. It's sent in the chat on a Google Doc.
Okay, we're gonna run prep time while we look at that really quickly. Starting.
Exact site's the first cut on the first card.
Wait, what?
The exact wording we cite is the first underlined part in the first card.
Okay, that's fine. I'll start prep time now. Alright. Peyton, mute yourself on my phone. Okay. It's gonna start my case, a little bit of like weighing framework stuff, their case. But the weighing and framework stuff can just be flowed on my second contention. It'll be an extension of impacts, like prioritization stuff. Okay. Okay. Starting on my first contention. Is anyone not ready? Okay. Starting our first contention about the developing world. On brain drain, concede that visas happen, no brain drain is going to increase. On drugs, concede that they do it for other reasons, so it will always happen in either world. On our second contention on immigrants, this is where we're winning. Funky 20 rates at 10.5 million undocumented immigrants are living in the United States, and the IS rates at 16% of those undocumented immigrants have health benefits through private insurance. Lebowski writes that Medicare-For-All means there's a single database that facilitates medical records, and Irwin writes that ICE would use this information from a centralized government system to track and deport immigrants, and Hoffman writes that this means undocumented immigrants will fear getting care, which Kimball impacts because that means that that'll lead to chronic illness. They have 5 responses. First, they say centralization costs a lot. It doesn't matter. We gain fiat. Medicare for all has centralization in the bill. That's what Little Bosky evidence says. Second, they say that ICE won't actually use this. Doesn't matter. It's a perception argument. It's the perception that now that healthcare is government run, immigrants fear it and care. They say ICE already does this. One, this contradicts their second response. Two, it's a perception argument. It doesn't matter. Fourth, they say there's other issues and there's no capital for ICE to do this. Once again, it's a perception argument. It doesn't respond to the idea that now that healthcare is government run, the 60% of immigrants that get private insurance will not get healthcare. Fifth answer that already happened, I already responded to that. Why do you prefer this? It's because the Brega and LeBlanc find that prioritizing legal violence against immigrants must come first, as violence is concealed, legitimized, and perpetuated in social structures. The framework draws out the many ways that immigration law serves as a legitimating source for the harmful treatment of immigrants. Legal reorganization is promoting a view of immigrants that enables dehumanizing acts to be perpetuated against them in inconspicuous ways. Essentially, when you make policy that excludes undocumented immigrants, the violence and the hate crimes that already happen to them only continues to happen and continues to become a societal norm. The only way you take a step in the right direction in preventing that is by negating. The reason you prefer this over any of their arguments is because they only impact people in the U.S. who have always had the privilege of getting health care. The difference is that undocumented immigrants have never been included in any policy that the U.S. has made. This is why you prefer them. But even if you don't want to buy them, we're also winning on their case. On their first contention about lives, you can extend the doctor shortage's turn. The Pipes evidence says that in the UK, there was a 120,000 doctor shortage and 9 million Britain appointments were canceled. They say there's lower administration costs. No, we have the empirical example for that piece of evidence because we've seen in a world where we've implemented a single-payer system, there was a shortage of 120,000 doctors. This means even if people have access to care, they won't actually get it because there's no doctors who give them that care. But then, you can also extend the Morrison evidence that says there will be a decrease in 24% of the GDP, which will leave 71% of households worse off. So even if people can access their medication, it doesn't matter because people are falling into poverty, which means they probably can't even have transportation to get to hospitals. On their second contention, you can extend the CFRB evidence. It was the fifth response that says debt will increase by 203%, which will cut social programs. They say, no, it'll be done through a progressive tax. No, we can't only tax the rich because the CFRB evidence, which goes conceded, says it's impossible to only tax the rich because it costs trillions and trillions of dollars. Also, it's not politically popular to only tax the rich. It would never pass in Congress. But then, they say our evidence is from a conservative institution. No, it's not. It's the CFRB. You can look at the evidence. It's really good. Taxing the rich is not enough. This is why you should also extend the Thor evidence that says there will be a 6.2% increase in payroll tax, which will decrease wages for people and increase small business closing. They're not winning on small businesses, they're not winning on the economy, but prefer immigrants over everything because they're continuously put out of policy making.
More spread.
Yeah.
Sure. So, actually, wait, we're going to take a tiny bit more prep. We're good. Time. So actually, before we start, it'll be extending a turn on their C1 subpoint B, then their C2, then weighing in that case. If everyone's ready, time starts now. So let's talk about B. They just tried to tell you there's always going to be pricing. We agree there's always going to be pricing. But we tell you in the status quo, pricing is very bad because there are monopolies in these developing countries because they just jack up the prices and get everyone else out of the market after they've lowered the price enough to kill all competition, which is why they're 30 times as expensive in the status quo, which is why 2 billion people in the developing world can't afford drugs. They say there's always going to be people selling to the developing world. Sure, that's fine. But the only way you stop the selling to the developing world being bad is in the Afro world, where they tell you for loss of evidence you remove the patents on these drugs, which means these 2 million people who couldn't access care before can access care. It's the cleanest link to the developing world that's literally conceded. Then on second section about immigrants, a bunch of problems here that they try to frontline with some weird perception arguments. One is it costs billions, so they won't do the merger database anyway. They say fiat doesn't solve for a reasonable implementation bill. All the bill is we have to try to enact it. After that, if they can't do the bill in the first place, because they can't actually add these databases together because it's too expensive, they won't do it in the first place. But then, they're trying to tell you the perception means immigrants will go to care. But we told you that ICE doesn't use these databases, and they've conceded to actually get these immigrants. We tell you immigrants care a lot more about this issue than some debaters in some high school around you. They probably done no research themselves, so they probably also know with their perception that they're not going to get targeted if they don't get care under Medicare-For-All. But then, finally, they've also conceded that ICE is shutting down because there are political barriers to it in the status quo, which means ICE isn't going to be a problem for these immigrants, which means they will not have the perception that they can't get care. Their argument isn't true. Then, they read this framing about how you should help the people who are undocumented immigrants because they're not helped by the U.S. But we did the same framing is probably true for the developing world, because one, they're not helped by U.S. policies, which means that for the same argument, for the same reason they have it, is also true. But secondly, they're not helped by their own country because they don't have things like social safety nets, which means these people are also marginalized, they're also not helped. We tell you, we really link into more and a higher level of this impact than they do. One, because you're linking into a higher scope. There are only 10 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. We tell you there's 400 million people out of poverty when you vote for the act. But secondly, because they have worse quality of life in the developing world, insofar as they can't access things like food and water, that's obviously not true in America. It's really clear that if you're looking to people who are marginalized, we have a much better link into that argument. On our case, they just send doctors without a warrant. They just do an empiric. One, they say 120,000 doctors returned to the UK. The same thing is true in the US. They have also conceded. But then also, they need to win a warrant insofar as they've conceded that they have worked, one, less hours, but two, for more pay. There's no reason there's a doctor shortage. You can't just extend empiric warrants or how debate works. Then, they try to extend a bunch of stuff about taxes. Not true at all. They concede pretty much everything is all through ink. Because we think it's going to be progressive taxes. One, because the rich control 60% of our wealth, so we'll just tax their wealth is the only feasible way to get it. Two, it's in the bill that there'll be progressive taxes, and we feel the bill. But three, 65% of Americans want progressive taxes. They don't get taxed with their own income. It's how politicians choose based on their consumer base. Which is why we tell you it's going to be not very bad base taxes. It's just going to be progressive taxes on the rich, which is why we tell you 29% of Americans are better, 90% of Americans are better off, and are bringing evidence find the poor get 29% more income because they don't have to pay for crippling healthcare costs, which are where evidence finds supposed to oversee the developing world after you live 8 million poverty. In the US, you live 400 million people out of poverty. In the developing world, because now we trade more with them and buy more of their goods, which is again the best link into marginalized communities in the ground. Very, very easy half out. All conceded.
Okay. Can I get first question?
Of course.
Okay. So if you guys get fiat that it's done through only taxing the rich, which first of all is not in the bill, but if let's assume it is and you guys get fiat off that, why can't we get fiat that there's a centralized system?
It's about reasonable implementation. We give you 2 reasons why it's a reasonable
I would say taxing only the rich is not very reasonable, considering our current president does not want to tax the rich. He would never pass that.
This is a very false dichotomy. Our president doesn't want to tax the rich, but what he wants to tax less is the middle class, which is why 65% of his base...
Which is why it'll be through a debt, which we tell you is really bad because it cuts social programs, which goes conceded.
You haven't extended debt. If you did,
Yes, we did. It was a CFRB evidence that says there'll be an increase in 203% of the debt, which will cut social programs.
Your CFRB evidence on our case said that the rich can't fund it.
No, there's two pieces of the CFRB evidence. One piece, which I extended, is that debt will increase by 203%, which will cut social programs for people in poverty. The second is that it's impossible to do through only taxing the rich, which your response is just like, that's a conservative institution, which is not.
You also conceded it can't be debt because per pay-as-you-go laws in Congress, it is mandated that you have to do mandatory spending increases with taxes. You've conceded, like, everything is through ink in that.
Okay.
So,
I don't think you understand the concept of like through ink, but even so, can I ask a question? So on
you
my
ask a question. I'm gonna take one.
okay,
So,
sure.
Let's talk. Actually, so how do you define the word marginalized?
Okay, so let's get into this. So you tell me that the developing world is marginalized, which means we should also refer them. We tell you to prefer undocumented immigrants.
Yeah.
We tell you that what Peter's going to come up here and say in final is that undocumented or the developing world will always be helped by like other countries, right? Like it's not only the U.S. helping the developing world. Wait, can I continue? In the developing world, other countries will always help the developing world. The U.S. is not key. The difference is that 10.5 million undocumented immigrants living in the U.S. can only be helped by the U.S. government. There's a key difference.
Do you honestly think that they have like great welfare programs in the developing world, that these countries are being helped by their own government?
That's not my argument. That's not my argument.
Question.
No, but
what is your evidence about the developing world refer to about helping the economy? What program does it call? The second piece of evidence. It was last year's Yale topic. Maybe it was like a little confusing, but this year is not about the Developing World Initiative.
I said 2 pieces on evidence in a doc because I put my evidence in a doc.
Yeah, so the first one says that China's Belt and Road Initiative would speed up economic growth for developing nations. I don't see the word like the United States.
Or Medicare-For-All.
Trade has lifted 1 billion people out of poverty.
Yes, I was referring to the Belt and Road Initiative.
Do you want every single piece of evidence I read in my case?
No, we asked for the piece of we asked for the piece of evidence that said that because we responded for the R. Wait, can I continue? Yeah. We responded with the RN's evidence that says there's a very low probability that these developing countries can actually increase their standing. And you responded. Wait, stop. You responded with the World Bank evidence that says that they've helped $1 billion. Your World Bank evidence is talking about the Belt and Road Initiative and how that's helped people.
Our World Bank evidence says that empirically trade lifted 1 billion people out of poverty, which lays the groundwork for more growth.
So that's other countries, right? Not just the U.S. That's other countries. That's other countries, not the U.S.
Is
that other countries or the U.S.?
Increases economic.
Is that other countries or the U.S.?
People have been
it's mostly the United States because we're the biggest global trader, so it's mostly us.
That's new analysis, but that's fine.
We're gonna run the rest of our prep starting. Okay, so I'm going to be starting at my case and then going to theirs, starting on subpoint B of first contention. Is everyone ready? They try to win on this subpoint to be about drug prices through this turnabout monopolies. Remember the D-link that they read themselves, that they'll always sell to other countries. That means that these monopolies will always exist. Even if you don't want to buy that, they don't really extend an internal link to how they trigger this impact. Don't let them win off of it. But the 2 ways you can vote for the neg is first on immigrants, because Funk and 20 finds that 10.5 million undocumented immigrants are living in the U.S. and 60% of those have private insurance. Importantly, Lebowski finds that Medicare-For-All means a single database which facilitates medical records. They just say that it's really expensive, but look to other countries empirically who have had this centralized database. It's in the bill itself. But Irwin finds that ICE would use this information through a centralized database to track down immigrants, which is why 60% of them are on private insurance right now. And Hoffman finds that undocumented immigrants won't use health care anymore because of fear of deportation of them and their families, which Kimball finds which will lead to chronic illness. They say that they're not going to be targeted. We'd say ICE in the current climate shows how they would be targeting. The reason why you prefer this is the Bregel-Laclani evidence, which finds that a legislation that's passed, like Medicare for All, legitimizes violence against them and hate crimes. That's the number one impact, because they just say, like, the developing world is always marginalized. The reason why it's different is look to their own evidence themselves, which is that the Belt and Road Initiative is solving for this. That loses them the round because it literally concedes that other countries are helping this. We are the only people who can help undocumented immigrants in the U.S. Don't let them give new responses now. But even if you want to give them some offense, the second way you can vote for us is on lives, because the turn from pipes that 9 million appointments were canceled in Britain due to lower wages, which is going to lead to a doctor shortage. They say we concede all warrants. That's a clear warrant. But even so, look to Morrison and finds that there's going to be a 24% decrease in GDP, which is going to lead 71% of families worse off because of the, because of the unaffordable cost. But now into their second contention, there's two pieces of CFRB evidence which goes conceded. The first is that rich taxes don't actually cover it. Bernie, this is all rhetoric. It's not actually implemented. But then we tell you that it's not politically popular. Look at our president, but also that it's going to increase debt by 203%, which pushes 45 million people back into poverty. That also goes conceded. Thus, it's a clear neg ballot.
War on pro. Okay. Starting on weighing. Gotta take a deep breath sometimes. Hold on. This round is super simple. We both agree that marginalization is the most important. We also both agree that people in the developing world are functionally marginalized. They have no one looking out for them, and they are in far worse poverty than immigrants in the United States. We say that 400 million people in the developing world out of poverty, which is by far the biggest impact to their lives, which they say that other actors help them. That's fine. They're obviously not helping them enough insofar as 400 million people are still in poverty. Our argument is fundamentally the most important argument in the round. If we win it, we win the round. So let's go there. They say two things. They first talk about a doctor shortage, but it's obviously untrue. They don't send a warrant as to why in the United States there will be a doctor shortage, just one as to why there was one in the EU. We say in the United States there's increased pay for doctors and decreased hour for doctors, never going to be any doctors living in practice. Then they say that taxes aren't going to be progressive. But remember, taxes absolutely are going to be progressive. We give you a couple warrants why. First, Bernie Sanders wants it. But second, we say that since they account for 60% of all wealth, it's how it must. It's the only way it can be funded feasibly. And third, it's 65% of Americans who think that taxes are good, that progressive taxes are good. So obviously, it's the most politically feasible thing. So we think it's going to be progressive taxes. So you can send our science evidence indicates that only the 10%, only the top 1% would be hurt, and the bottom 99% would see massive gains of income on Medicare for all. Tend to pay less for healthcare, which means that they can now spend more into the economy, which we say flows over to the developing world. Leaving 400 million people out of poverty. Argument is very simple and very clean, and also conceded. But even if you want to look to their argument, you're definitely not voting for it because there are two conceded pieces of defense. The first is that right now it costs so much money to centralize databases in the status quo that it's never going to ever happen. It's never going to ever happen because politicians will have a feeble attempt to cut costs and they never centralize databases. So ICE will never be able to use them. But second, we think that ICE is currently a regressive movement that's not going to be a thing in the future as people push against, as like Democrats push back against ICE. So obviously, ICE is not a problem in the status quo. But if this is too murky for you and want a very easy path out, our argument is conceded. They themselves tell you that we're always going to sell drugs in the developing world and it's always going to be monopolized. But we say when you affirm the resolution, you allow the United States to revoke patents from people selling drugs in the developing world. That alone gives 2 billion people access to drugs. It's such an easy path out, and it's so simple and the biggest impact in the round. Very clear ballot for the ALF. The only words on your ballot are I vote for it.
Good round, you all.
Good round.
Good round.